The moment I saw Barbara Sutton standing on my cabin porch holding a clipboard and wearing that smug expression, I knew my peaceful winter weekend was about to turn into a nightmare. I had just pulled up to my small cabin in the mountains of Vermont, about 20 miles outside of Rutland, ready for a quiet week away from the chaos of my job as an electrical contractor. The drive from Boston had taken nearly 4 hours through increasingly heavy snow, and all I wanted was to get inside, fire up my propane heater, and relax with a book and some whiskey. Instead, there was Barbara, the president of the Mountain View Estates Homeowners Association, tapping her foot impatiently in the cold. "Brandon Sawyer," she called out as I stepped out of my truck. "We need to discuss a serious violation." I pulled my jacket tighter against the biting wind. It was January, and the temperature was hovering around 15 degrees. "Barbara, whatever it is, can it wait until I at least get inside? I have been driving for hours." "This is about what is inside," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Your propane heater is a direct violation of HOA regulations, Section 12, subsection 4. All heating appliances must be electric or approved by the board. Propane is a fire hazard." I stared at her, certain I had misheard. "My propane heater. The one I have been using for 3 years without a single problem. That is my primary heat source." "Irrelevant." Barbara flipped through papers on her clipboard. "The regulation was updated 6 months ago. All homeowners received notification." "I never received anything," I said, fishing my keys out of my pocket. "And even if I did, you cannot just ban someone's heating source in the middle of winter." Barbara's eyes narrowed. "The regulation is clear. You have 48 hours to remove the propane heater and install an electric system, or the HOA will be forced to take action." "Take action," I laughed, though there was no humor in it. "What are you going to do, Barbara? It is 15 degrees out here." "We will remove the violation ourselves and bill you for the service," she said primly. "As outlined in your HOA agreement, Section 23. I wanted to argue more, but the cold was seeping through my jacket, and I could feel the beginning of a headache forming. "I will look into this after I get settled. Right now I need to warm up." Barbara pursed her lips but stepped aside. 48 hours, Mr. Sawyer, not a moment more." She walked back to her oversized SUV, nearly slipping on a patch of ice in the driveway, and I watched her drive away before heading inside. The cabin was freezing, the kind of cold that settles into your bones. I immediately went to the propane heater in the living room and turned it on. The familiar whoosh of ignition brought instant relief, and I held my hands over the warming unit. This cabin had been my sanctuary for 5 years. After my divorce, I needed somewhere to escape, and this small 2-bedroom place with its view of the mountains had been perfect. The HOA had always been strict, but Barbara Sutton had taken over as president 2 years ago and turned it into something resembling a dictatorship. She sent violation notices for snow on roofs, cars parked at slightly wrong angles, and trash cans visible from the street. But this was different. This was dangerous. I spent the evening researching the HOA regulations on my laptop. Sure enough, buried in a mountain of updated bylaws from July, there was a new heating regulation. But the notification process was suspect. The update had been sent via email to an address I had not used in years, and there was no certified mail, no follow-up. It seemed designed to catch people off guard. 48 hours came and went. I was not about to install an electric heating system in my cabin during a Vermont winter, especially when the propane heater was perfectly safe and had been inspected just 6 months earlier. I figured Barbara would send another threatening letter, maybe even a fine, but I could handle that. I was wrong. 3 days after Barbara's visit, I received a call from my neighbor Tom, who lived in the cabin next to mine. "Brandon, you need to get up here. The HOA is at your place and they have a truck." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean they have a truck?" "They are inside your cabin. Barbara had someone unlock the door. They are taking stuff out." I was in Boston at the time, working a job that I could not leave. "Call the police, Tom. They cannot just break into my property." "I already tried. The officer said it is a civil matter because the HOA has authority in the covenant." I hung up and immediately called my lawyer, Dennis Richardson, who I had worked with during my divorce. He did not sugarcoat it. If the HOA agreement gives them right of entry for violations and you ignored their notice, they might actually have legal standing. It is a terrible law, but it exists in Vermont. You will need to fight this in court. By the time I made it back to the cabin that evening, driving through another snowstorm, the damage was done. My propane heater was gone. The door had been relocked, but the cabin interior told the story. There were muddy footprints across my floors, furniture had been moved, and most importantly, the temperature inside was barely above freezing. I called Barbara immediately. "You broke into my cabin and stole my heater." "We removed a violation as per HOA regulations," she said, her tone maddeningly calm. "The heater is being held in HOA storage until you comply with the heating requirements. People can die from exposure in these temperatures. You have put me in danger." "That is dramatic, Mr. Sawyer. Perhaps this will encourage you to install proper heating. The sooner you comply, the sooner this issue is resolved." I hung up before I said something I would regret and immediately started setting up space heaters powered by the cabin's electrical system. The problem was that the cabin's wiring was old and could not handle the load required to heat the entire space. I managed to keep the bedroom and bathroom warm enough to be functional, but the living room and kitchen remained bitterly cold. That night, as temperatures dropped to 5 degrees, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A sharp crack echoed through the cabin, followed by the sound of running water. I grabbed my flashlight and found water pouring from a burst pipe in the wall behind the kitchen sink. The cold had frozen the pipes, and now they had split. I shut off the main water valve, but the damage was done. Water had flooded the kitchen floor, seeping under the cabinets and into the subflooring. I spent the next 2 hours mopping up water and setting out buckets, knowing that mold and structural damage were now inevitable. The next morning, I called a plumber from Rutland. He arrived around noon, a weathered guy named Pete who took one look at the situation and shook his head. "You need heat in here, buddy. These old pipes cannot handle this cold. You are looking at replacing at least 20 feet of copper piping, maybe more if the freeze went further than we can see." "How much?" I asked, though I already knew it would not be cheap. "Parts and labor, probably $3,500, and that is if we do not find more damage once we open up the walls." I authorized the work, fury building with every passing minute. This was Barbara's fault. The HOA had created this situation by removing my only adequate heat source in the middle of winter. Pete worked through the afternoon while I documented everything with photos and videos. The burst pipes, the water damage, the inadequate heating, all of it. I also measured the temperature in various rooms, finding that the living room was hovering at 42 degrees despite having 2 space heaters running. When Pete finished, the bill came to $3,800 after they found additional damage in the wall cavity. I paid it, but I knew this was far from over. I called Dennis Richardson again. "I want to sue the HOA. They caused this." "Tell me everything," he said, and I did. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "This is actually a strong case. They removed your heating in winter. Pipes burst as a direct result, and you have damages. We can file in civil court for the repair costs plus compensation for their negligence. But you should also know that HOA cases can be difficult. They have lawyers on retainer and deep pockets from dues. I do not care. What they did was wrong and dangerous. Then let me draw up the paperwork. In the meantime, document everything, every expense, every temperature reading, every interaction with Barbara. Over the next week, I did exactly that. I also discovered that I was not the only one having issues with Barbara and the HOA. Tom told me about another homeowner, Patricia, who had been fined $5,000 for painting her cabin door without approval, even though she had used the exact color that was already there. Another neighbor, Mike, had been threatened with foreclosure over unpaid fines for having his trash cans visible on a non-collection day. The HOA meeting was scheduled for the third Tuesday of the month, and I decided to attend. It was held in the community center, a small building near the entrance of our development. About 15 homeowners showed up, which was more than usual according to Tom. Barbara sat at the head table with two other board members, Richard and Susan. She called the meeting to order with the kind of authoritative tone that made it clear she enjoyed her power. First order of business, she began, is the continued enforcement of heating regulations. We have had one homeowner refuse to comply, resulting in necessary HOA action. You broke into my cabin and stole my heater, I said loudly from my seat in the back. Barbara's expression hardened. Mr. Sawyer, you will address the board respectfully or be asked to leave. Respectfully, I stood up, pulling out my phone. You removed my heating in January. My pipes froze and burst. I have nearly $4,000 in damage because of your actions. Several homeowners turned to look at me, then at Barbara. Tom stood up as well. Brandon is right. That regulation change was not properly communicated. I never got a notice either. The notices were sent according to our bylaws, Barbara said. If homeowners choose not to maintain current contact information, that is not the HOA's responsibility. You sent an email to an address I have not used in 5 years, I shot back. That is not proper notification for a regulation that affects safety. Richard, one of the other board members, cleared his throat. Barbara, perhaps we should review the notification process. If multiple homeowners did not receive the update, that could be an issue. Barbara shot him a look that could melt steel. The process was followed. Mr. Sawyer is attempting to deflect from his own violation. The matter is closed. It is not closed, I said. I have filed a lawsuit against the HOA for negligence and property damage. You will be hearing from my lawyer. The room erupted in murmurs. Barbara's face turned red. This meeting is over. Everyone leave. Now. You cannot just end the meeting because you do not like what is being said, Tom protested. I am the president of this board and I determine when meetings end. Everyone out. People filed out slowly, several stopping to talk to me. Patricia, the woman who had been fined for the door paint, grabbed my arm. Please win this case. She has made life miserable for so many of us. I am going to try, I promised. The lawsuit moved forward. Dennis filed the complaint in Rutland County Superior Court, seeking the return of my propane heater, reimbursement for the plumbing repairs, additional damages for the property damage caused by the frozen pipes, and compensation for the HOA's negligent actions. We asked for $15,000 in total, covering repairs, property devaluation, and punitive damages. The HOA responded with their own attorney, a stern woman named Margaret who specialized in HOA defense. Her response argued that I had been properly notified, that I had violated the regulations knowingly, and that any damage to my property was my own responsibility for failing to winterize properly. It was insulting, but Dennis assured me it was standard defense strategy. They are going to fight hard. HOAs hate setting precedents that homeowners can sue successfully, but we have evidence on our side. The discovery process was exhausting. We had to provide documentation of everything: purchase receipts for the propane heater, inspection records, emails, photos of the damage, the plumber's report, everything. Margaret demanded my employment records, arguing that if I was not at the cabin regularly, I had abandoned proper maintenance. It was a reach, but we had to comply. In return, we got access to HOA documents. That was when things got interesting. The notification Barbara claimed to have sent was dated July 15th, but the email server logs showed it had only been sent to 12 of the 37 homeowners in the development. The other notifications had bounced or were never sent at all. More importantly, the regulation itself had been pushed through by Barbara without a proper vote. The bylaws required a majority of the board to approve regulation changes, but Barbara had simply declared it approved without Richard or Susan actually voting. "This is huge," Dennis said when he reviewed the documents. "They did not follow their own procedures. The regulation might not even be valid." We filed an amended complaint adding that detail. Margaret tried to have it dismissed, but the judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Melissa Corrigan, allowed it to proceed. "This court takes property rights seriously," she said during a hearing in March. If the HOA did not follow proper procedures and caused damage to Mr. Sawyer's property as a result, that is absolutely something we need to examine. The trial was set for May, which meant I had to wait months for resolution. In the meantime, I installed a minimal electric heating system in the cabin just to keep the pipes from freezing again, costing me another $2,000. I documented that expense as well. Barbara ramped up her harassment. I received violation notices for having a vehicle parked in my driveway overnight, for snow on my roof, for a crack in one of my windows, and for not maintaining my lawn, even though it was buried under 2 feet of snow. Each violation came with a $50 fine. I did not pay any of them, instead forwarding them to Dennis. "She is retaliating," he said. "Document all of it. This actually helps our case." In April, something unexpected happened. Richard, one of the HOA board members, resigned. He sent a letter to all homeowners explaining that he could no longer support Barbara's leadership and that she had been acting without board approval for months. Susan followed a week later with her own resignation letter, stating similar concerns. This left Barbara as the sole board member, which according to the HOA bylaws was not legal. The association required at least 3 board members at all times. But Barbara refused to call for new elections, claiming she had the authority to continue as acting president until a special election could be organized, which she never scheduled. Tom and several other homeowners started a petition to force a vote of no confidence, but Barbara ignored it. The HOA was essentially being run as a dictatorship. Finally, May arrived and with it, the trial. I wore my best suit and met Dennis at the courthouse in Rutland early in the morning. The building was a stately old structure with high ceilings and dark wood paneling. Judge Corrigan's courtroom was on the 2nd floor. Margaret was already there with Barbara, who was dressed in a conservative blue dress and looked every bit the concerned community leader. It was a costume, but an effective one. The trial began with opening statements. Dennis laid out our case clearly. The HOA had not properly notified homeowners of a regulation change, had removed my heating source in dangerous winter conditions without proper authority, and had directly caused thousands of dollars in damage to my property. Margaret countered that I had been adequately notified, that the regulation was valid, and that I had failed in my duty as a homeowner to maintain my property properly. She painted me as a negligent owner trying to blame the HOA for my own failures. Then came the witnesses. I testified first, walking through the entire timeline. Barbara's visit, the lack of notification, the removal of my heater, the frozen pipes, everything. Margaret Cross examined me aggressively, trying to suggest that I had received the email and ignored it, that I should have been at the cabin more often, that I had failed to winterize properly. "Mr. Sawyer, is it true that you only visited your cabin twice in the month of January?" she asked. "I was working in Boston. I cannot be in two places at once." "So you abandoned the property?" "I did not abandon anything. The cabin had adequate heating until your client removed it." "That is not what I asked. You were not there to monitor the property, correct?" "I was there the night the pipes burst. I came up specifically because it was so cold and I was worried about the inadequate heating situation your client created." Judge Corrigan interrupted. "Counsel, move on. I think we have established that Mr. Sawyer was not living at the cabin full time." Pete, the plumber, testified next. He explained in detail how frozen pipes burst, the damage he found, and his professional opinion that the cabin had been too cold for too long. "In your professional opinion," Dennis asked, "would the pipes have burst if the propane heater had still been functioning?" "No," Pete said firmly. "That heater was rated for the space. It would have kept the temperature well above freezing. The space heaters Mr. Sawyer was using were inadequate for the square footage and the extreme cold we had that week." Margaret tried to shake his testimony, but could not. Pete knew his business and explained everything in clear, understandable terms. The next witness was supposed to be Tom, who would testify about the HOA's pattern of harassment and improper procedures. But Dennis called Richard, the former board member, instead. Richard looked uncomfortable on the stand, but he was honest. "Barbara pushed through that heating regulation without a proper vote. Susan and I only found out about it when homeowners started complaining. When we questioned her, she said she had the authority as president to make emergency safety decisions." "Did you agree it was an emergency?" Dennis asked. "No. Propane heaters are used safely in thousands of homes. There was no emergency. I think Barbara just did not like them for aesthetic reasons. She mentioned once that propane tanks looked ugly in people's yards." That testimony was damaging. Margaret tried to rehabilitate on cross-examination, but Richard would not budge. He had clearly had enough of Barbara's leadership. Barbara herself took the stand that afternoon. She was composed and confident, explaining that she had acted in the best interest of the community, that safety was paramount, and that she had followed all proper procedures. "Miss Sutton," Dennis said during cross-examination, "you testified that you sent email notifications to all homeowners about the regulation change. But the server logs show only 12 emails were sent. Can you explain that discrepancy?" Barbara hesitated. "I sent the emails to the addresses we had on file. If homeowners did not keep their contact information current, that is not my fault. But you did not send certified letters or any follow-up communication for a regulation that affected people's primary heating sources in winter." "Email notification is sufficient according to our bylaws. Yet the bylaws also require board approval for regulation changes, which did not happen, correct? I had the authority to make emergency safety decisions." "Was there an emergency? Had there been propane heater incidents in the community?" Barbara's jaw tightened. "I determined that the risk was high enough to warrant immediate action. Based on what evidence, my judgment as president?" Dennis let that hang in the air for a moment. "So, based solely on your personal judgment, without board approval, without proper notification. You changed a regulation and then forcibly entered Mr. Sawyer's property to remove his heating in January. Is that accurate? I followed the procedures available to me as president. Even though those procedures left Mr. Sawyer with inadequate heat and resulted in nearly $4,000 in damage, Mr. Sawyer should have complied with the regulation. A regulation he never received notice of. He had access to HOA communications via an email address he had not used in 5 years, which you had in your records. Did you attempt any other form of communication? Barbara did not answer immediately. Finally, she said, I followed our standard notification procedures. The trial lasted 2 full days. By the end, I was exhausted but cautiously optimistic. Dennis had presented a strong case, and Barbara's testimony had not helped her cause. Judge Corrigan took 2 weeks to issue her ruling. When the decision came, it was comprehensive and brutal for the HOA. The judge found that the HOA had failed to follow proper procedures in implementing the heating regulation, that notification had been inadequate, and that Barbara had exceeded her authority by acting without board approval. More importantly, Judge Corrigan ruled that removing a primary heating source in winter constituted negligent and reckless behavior that directly caused the damage to my property. The HOA was ordered to immediately return my propane heater in the same condition it had been removed, or pay its replacement value of $1,200. They were ordered to pay the full amount of my plumbing repair costs, $3,800. They were ordered to pay for the electric heating system I had been forced to install, $2,000, and they were ordered to pay an additional $5,000 in damages for the property devaluation caused by the water damage and Barbara's pattern of harassment. The total came to just over $11,000, plus court costs and my attorney fees, which added another $8,000. The HOA owed me $19,000, but Judge Corrigan was not done. In a scathing addendum, she wrote that Barbara Sutton had abused her position as HOA president and had operated the association in violation of its own bylaws. The judge ordered the immediate dissolution of the current board and mandated new elections within 30 days. I read the decision 3 times, hardly believing it. Dennis called me that afternoon, practically shouting with excitement. This is a complete victory, Brandon. You got everything we asked for and more. Can they appeal? I asked. They can try, but they would lose. The facts are clear, and the judge's reasoning is sound. I would advise them to pay up and move on. The HOA did appeal initially, filing paperwork through Margaret. But at a hearing 2 weeks later, the appeals court judge took one look at the case and denied the appeal within 15 minutes. The lower court's decision is well-reasoned and supported by evidence, the appeals judge said. This association demonstrated a clear pattern of improper governance and negligent behavior. The appeal is denied, and the original judgment stands. That was the end of the legal battle. The HOA had 30 days to pay the judgment. When they missed the deadline, Dennis filed for collections, and the court authorized seizing HOA funds to satisfy the debt. My $19,000 was paid in full by the end of June. My propane heater was returned, though it had been damaged in storage. They had left it outside in the rain, and the unit was rusted and non-functional. I took photos, filed an additional small claims case, and received the $1,200 replacement value. I bought a new, even better propane heater with the money. The forced HOA election happened in July. Barbara ran again, incredibly, acting as though nothing had happened, but the homeowners had had enough. A retired teacher named Paul ran against her and won in a landslide. Susan agreed to return to the board along with Tom and Patricia, forming a new leadership that immediately began reversing Barbara's policies. The heating regulation was rescinded at their first meeting. Several other restrictive rules were loosened or eliminated. Fines that Barbara had issued were reviewed, and many were forgiven. The HOA began functioning the way it was supposed to, as a community organization, not a dictatorship. Barbara, for her part, disappeared from community life. She stopped attending HOA meetings and rarely left her cabin. Tom told me she tried to sell her property, but word of the lawsuit had spread, and potential buyers were wary of someone who had caused so much trouble. In September, I received an unexpected piece of information. Patricia called me one evening, her voice urgent. "Brandon, you need to hear this." I was talking to Susan, and she was going through the HOA's financial records. "There is money missing." "What do you mean missing?" I asked. "Nearly $30,000. It was there in the accounts last year, but Barbara moved it to something called a discretionary fund. Susan cannot find any record of what it was used for." I contacted Dennis immediately. He advised me to let the new HOA board investigate first, but if they found evidence of embezzlement, it would be a criminal matter. The board hired a forensic accountant, a thorough woman named Janet, who spent a week reviewing every transaction from the past 3 years. Her report was damning. Barbara had created the discretionary fund without board approval and had been paying herself a salary of $2,000 per month for the past 18 months. HOA presidents were volunteer positions. She had also used HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, landscaping for her own property, a new roof, even a vacation to Florida that she had classified as a conference expense. The total amount misappropriated was $34,000. The new board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to file a police report. I attended the meeting, as did most of the community. Paul explained the findings, and the anger in the room was palpable. "This woman has been stealing from us while fining us for nonsense violations," Mike said, his face red. "She needs to be arrested." 2 days later, a detective from the Rutland Police Department came to the community to interview board members and review the financial evidence. His name was Detective Harris, a middle-aged man with a patient demeanor and sharp eyes. He also wanted to talk to me. We met at my cabin and I walked him through everything: the lawsuit, Barbara's retaliation, the pattern of harassment. "She sounds like a piece of work," Harris said, making notes. "The embezzlement case is pretty clear from what I have seen. The DA will likely press charges. This amount of theft from a community organization is serious." "Will I need to testify?" I asked. "Possibly, if it goes to trial. But with financial records this clear, she will probably take a plea deal." Detective Harris was right. In October, Barbara Sutton was arrested at her cabin and charged with embezzlement, theft, and fraud. The local news covered it, showing footage of her being led out in handcuffs, her face hidden behind her hands. The community watched with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. No one wanted their neighborhood on the news for something like this, but justice needed to be served. Barbara's lawyer negotiated a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to embezzlement and agreed to pay full restitution of $34,000 to the HOA. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison, with 18 months suspended, meaning she would serve 6 months, followed by 5 years of probation. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Vermont, a condition of her probation. Her cabin was sold to cover the restitution, and she moved out of state after her release. I heard through Tom that she went to live with family in Ohio, but no one kept track of her after that. Life in the Mountain View Estates community improved dramatically. The new board focused on actual community needs rather than petty enforcement. They organized social events, repaired common areas, and communicated transparently about finances and decisions. It felt like an actual community for the first time since I had bought my cabin. I continued to use my new propane heater without any issues. In fact, Paul specifically mentioned during one board meeting that propane heaters were safe and effective, and anyone who wanted to use one was welcome to do so. The water damage in my cabin was fully repaired using the money from the judgment. I hired a contractor to replace the damaged subflooring and cabinets, and by December, everything was better than before. I spent Christmas at the cabin that year, the first time I had done so since buying the place. Tom and his wife came over for dinner, along with Patricia and a few other neighbors who had become friends through the ordeal. We sat around my propane heater, warm and comfortable, sharing stories and laughter. "You know, Brandon," Tom said, raising his glass of wine, "you did all of us a favor by standing up to Barbara. A lot of people were too afraid." "I was just defending my property," I said. "I did not set out to change the HOA." "But you did," Patricia added. "You showed everyone that we did not have to put up with her tyranny. That mattered." It was a good evening, one of the best I had had in years. Looking back on everything that happened, from Barbara's initial confrontation to the trial to her eventual arrest, I realized how much had changed. I had gone from wanting a quiet retreat to becoming an accidental catalyst for community change. The lawsuit had cost me time, money, and stress, but it had been worth it. Not just for the financial compensation, though that was nice, but for the principle of the thing. Barbara had abused her power and endangered people's property and safety. She had needed to be stopped, and I was glad I had been the one to do it. The following spring, I received a letter from Judge Corrigan's office. It was a formal note, thanking me for my patience during the legal process, and informing me that my case had been cited in a recent Vermont legal journal as an example of proper HOA oversight. Apparently, my lawsuit had led to discussions about reforming HOA laws in the state to prevent similar abuses. Dennis called me when he saw the article. "You are famous in HOA law circles now," he joked. "Your case is being taught as an example of what happens when HOAs exceed their authority." "I just wanted my heater back," I said, but I was smiling. That summer, the community held its first annual barbecue, organized by the new board. Over 50 people attended, nearly everyone in the development. There was food, music, and kids playing in the common area. It felt like what a community should be. Neighbors enjoying each other's company without fear of violation notices or arbitrary rules. Paul gave a short speech, thanking everyone for their patience during the transition, and promising that the board would continue to serve the community's interests. He specifically thanked me for having the courage to stand up against unfair treatment, and everyone applauded. It was embarrassing but also gratifying. As I stood there, plate of food in hand, watching my neighbors laugh and talk, I felt a sense of peace I had not experienced in years. This was what I had wanted when I bought the cabin. A place to escape, to relax, to be part of a community. Barbara had nearly destroyed that, but in the end, her tyranny had brought everyone together. My cabin remained my sanctuary, but now it was part of something larger. The Mountain View Estates community became more than just a collection of vacation properties. It became a real neighborhood, with people who looked out for each other and worked together. I continued to visit regularly, spending long weekends and holidays there. My propane heater kept the place warm and comfortable, just as it always had. The pipes never froze again, and I never received another ridiculous violation notice. Every once in a while, when I sat by the fire with a glass of whiskey, I would think about that first confrontation with Barbara on my porch. At the time, it had seemed like such a small thing, a dispute about a heater, but it had become so much more. It had exposed corruption, changed a community, and reminded everyone that standing up for what is right matters, even when it is difficult. The legal battle had taught me that HOA agreements are not untouchable, that boards can be held accountable, and that homeowners have rights that cannot be violated, even by community organizations. It also taught me that sometimes the fight is worth it, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. Years later, I still own that cabin. The HOA runs smoothly under competent leadership. Barbara Sutton is a distant memory, a cautionary tale told to new homeowners about the importance of proper governance. And my propane heater, the catalyst for everything, still sits in my living room, keeping me warm through Vermont winters. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had just complied, installed electric heat, and accepted Barbara's tyranny. The pipes might not have burst, and I would have avoided the stress of a lawsuit. But Barbara would have continued her abuses, stealing from the community and harassing homeowners. Other people would have suffered and nothing would have changed. In the end, I made the right choice. I fought back against an unjust system, held a corrupt leader accountable, and helped create lasting change. The cost was high, but the reward was knowing that I had done the right thing, not just for myself, but for everyone in the community. And that knowledge, more than any financial judgment, made the entire ordeal worthwhile.